I'm so sorry I forgot to record earlier. I just remembered to start.
No worries. Uh, Again, this is how we're thinking we could integrate some of that deconstructed wall block or similar material to kind of keep that common language, but really make that slope functional, either for events that could happen in the park or just, again, it's up gradient, so you're getting great views um, uh, of the river and across the river. Um, and how that plaza space adjacent to the culmination of the Fish Passage could be a great flexible plaza utilized for all sorts of dated activities or events. Also noted, go back 1 second. Sorry, Nels. I just
Yep.
can kind of see in the background the where we've introduced some interpretive signage along the railing along the Fish Passage that could speak to all sorts of things. Obviously, how the Fish Passage is working, what we're studying, potential to have QR codes and things like that that tie you into some of the more technical aspects of how of the public access or an education about the Fish Passage, as well as the view sheds of what you're looking at on the other side of the river. Next slide.
I would just mention as well, if I may, this would be the area that we still are working through some design opportunities. You can kind of see in shaded relief here this, vehicular access, this, green access, if you will. This would be for if construction equipment were required by the National Park Service to conduct repairs or maintenance of the spillway as they did a few years ago. That would really be there to facilitate that access. That's essentially the same access route that they used. This plaza area is almost the same, footprint that they also used for their staging. And this would be the location that Rydam would, bring their equipment in vehicles, if you will, to come down to gain access to the below ground portion of the fishway. So we would envision that these grading panels would be hinged or removable in some manner that would facilitate Rydam's access. And then they would have like a staircase, a metal staircase down to, the whole fishway itself is probably on the order of 15 to 18 feet deep, depending upon what location. It gets deeper, more than 20 feet deep down here, down to the invert. But at this location, they would go down, I'll call it one story, plus or minus 10 feet to get to the top of the baffles where there'd be a walkway extending along the entire length of the fishway. So one of the things that we're thinking about is, in addition to a camera here that is monitoring the numbers and size and types of fish, and Rydam's ability to come in here and sample and tag and measure fish, are viewing opportunities for the public. And it may be that some of these panels could be removed or hinged up, and railing system could be put down here so that the public could actually look down. Looking through the grading, we want to get as much light into the fishway as possible, which kind of governs the size of the grading. But we want to try to find that balance so that the community can see and hear and experience the fish that are moving below this grading that they're walking on, but also to have events where that grading could be removed, or maybe even a design feature where there's a permanent railing around an opening that the public could come and see. But again, safety is our primary concern in that. So again, this is part of the conversation that we're having internally and with Rydam, and want to have with the community here to get the input and thoughts, and so that we can carry that forward. Ian, I'll just continue on here.
Yep. Yeah, so here we are at the corner of the Main Street Bridge and the upstream section of the Fish Passage, looking over to Slater Mill. As you can see, the promenade and the Fish Passage grate are flush at this point. So We have an accessible surface with benching and lighting along that walkway, but also the ability to come up to the wall on the riverside, and and folks will be able to walk right on top of the grate. As you get a little further down, you can see where it steps back and you have the hardscape area on both sides as an extended overlook that leads you down to that flexible plaza.
One thing I'll just mention here as well is that, RITEM's access will entail the ability to get equipment, more or less heavy equipment onto this portion of the grading. The rest of the grading, because we want to keep it as thin and light as possible, will be pedestrian rated. But this is a location where on the other side of this railing down along the river, this is where those, the remnant gear works are for the former mill race canal inlet. Those would be removed. There's an electrical cabinet that services all these lights along the river wall. That cabinet would be either relocated interior to the panel to the fishway, or it would be put on the riverside face of this wall. Essentially, we're up at about elevation 35 here at the sidewalk, and the spillways around elevation 20 or so. So there's going to be a vault down here that will, be necessary for the hydraulic operation of the fishway. That will have a gate and a debris screen to allow water to come into the fishway at this location. Well, technically not into a fishway, but into a conduit that facilitates access. But RIDEM will need to, again, have the ability to have a maintenance staff to get down on the riverside of this wall, as well as for equipment to position itself and get access down into this vault structure that, again, is on the riverside of this wall along the spillway. Okay. All right, next slide.
So now we're on the downstream side at that Main Street connection. And I think this is a really neat evolution of the design. So on the left, you see the paver walkway that's providing access to the downstream portion of the fish passage. But off of the sidewalk zone, we've held this overlook high. So the fish passage is sort of passing just to the right and beneath this area, but it gives this really interesting high perch overlook. And then the primary walkway continues past it along the left side, again to the fish passage maintenance access.
And you'll notice on this side that the fishway is not flush with the entire pedestrian path
Yep,
that
great
makes its
point.
way down to that plaza destination below. So there will be a retaining wall on that, right edge there, with views down to the fish passage below. And once we get to the next view showing that plaza down at the end there, you'll have a better sense of what that starts to look like.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So along that railing, as you're right along that railing, you'll be looking like straight down into the fish passage. It'll be a pretty cool perspective to see. And then, as Alice has pointed out, as we work our way down, you're getting more down to the grade of it.
I'll also add that one of the things we're really pleased about in this design is how we've been able to achieve a fully accessible walk from each destination plaza, each end of the fishway, the promenade that functions, like Nils has said, both as maintenance access and construction access and public access, is a comfortable walking grade for all. And at the end here, you can start to see how we've started to integrate those stone blocks that could potentially be salvaged from the flood wall into that accessible walk, that comes down from the plaza level to the front flood wall there. You can start to see that there are a couple of kind of informal perches and overlooks in places that allow people to get views of both the fishway and the river. It could be a really dynamic space with these integrated seating areas, lighting. Um, yeah, sorry, Ian, can jump
No,
back in.
no, perfect. I mean, I think I think this area is getting very dynamic. You know, it has this great perch kind of at the upper part that provides kind of an upper overlook. Then we've used those blocks, as Allison stated, to step down the slope from the paved area and the redevelopment uphill. Um, what what I also think is really important to note, so this is sort of the culmination of the public access. There would be gated access, obviously, for the operation and maintenance of the fish passage at this point. But from a safety standpoint, one of the strategies of why we liked this peeling back using the stadium seating integrated with the ADA access down to this lower overlook is that it's not a dead end. It doesn't just have a sunken lower spot, you know, that's all railed with one way out of like a stairway. Um, Basically, all of these are a series of seating steps that would, you know, be very open and airy feeling, and the ability, you know, where you never felt like you were locked in a particular spot. From a I think it's going to make it feel very open and inviting without feeling uncomfortable or presenting, you know, we always want to be mindful that we're not creating spaces like that where, you know, people feel vulnerable. So that is something that we wanted to make sure that we mentioned.
I'll just point out here just quickly again, this grading is continuous. So again, you have that kind of vertical drop off, and then the fishway will emerge from, you know, the tunnel, if you will, below Main Street. And so there will be grading continuously along this length. And it will be rated for, you know, again, for pedestrian loads, but it will not be accessible. It will frankly only be accessible to RITEM staff. So again, we have this walkway here facilitating RITEM's access, but again, these are kind of design, you know, conversations that we're having as to, you know, basically our strategy is to put together a design that's kind of a placeholder until the funding for the construction of these elements is in place. But to be able to include it in the permitting to CRMC and Army Corps. So again, anything that we do to enhance and, you know, make the final design revisions, if you will, through the community engagement will be more or less you know, within the footprint of the original permitted area, number one, but also the hard features, if you will, kind of are you know, adequate, large enough, I'll say it, or expansive enough so that any modification that we do would not be a net increase that would, you know, create a concern. So our goal here is again recognizing that there's a pretty extensive canopy along this entire length of the river. We're trying to replicate it as much as possible to provide those, you know, shade benefits. But just in terms of RITEM's access, again, we're trying to be as flexible as we can. This little overlook area was actually created to allow a piece of equipment to be able to get a hoist or to get, you know, hoisting access to, you know, essentially a tide, I'll call it a water control gate. That water control gate will be entirely below the grading surface, so it will not be visible. But there will be another, you know, water feature, if you will, that discharges water adjacent to the fishway entrance. That will be also part of RITEM's access. So there's kind of a subterranean vault in here that, again, will be part of RITEM's maintenance access. The other part I'll just kind of mention here is that you can kind of see the stone facade of the existing wall. So this is the portion of the wall that would essentially be dismantled, and all of those blocks would be beneficially reused in all the various, you know, features of the park, and even as we noted for the terrace seating. This portion of the wall will actually be, you know, so more or less steel I-beams set into the river bottom, socketed into the bedrock below the river bottom. and there will be precast concrete panels set between those I-beams that will form a construction phase cofferdam to allow all of this work to be done in a dry environment with the construction equipment. And this will essentially be a staging and access area for the equipment to be able to construct this fishway going up here. But again, the idea being that the concrete panels that are placed between the I-beams, and those I-beams will probably be on like a 6-foot or an 8-foot spacing. We'll try to, utilize a form lining and, a staining or whatever kind of texturing or coloring that we can incorporate it into the design to make it as congruent with the, with the visual aesthetic and the industrial heritage of this area. So again, this will be something that will be refined in our design and graphics going forward.
Nils, can I stop you with a question?
Of course.
Are we proposing to fill this portion of the river or use the existing wall?
Yeah, so essentially, of course, the river wall runs continuously along this face and then along this face. So this is a protrusion that extends out into the river. And so again, this was part of the conversation with CRMC to talk about the volume of fill that would be placed in the river. It's a tidal river, so in terms of floodplain storage, it's not really, relevant, but obviously, in terms of the volume of material that's going to be excavated from this channel, and there's going to be a volume of bedrock that's also removed. The elevation of the bottom of the river is around -2 to -4. Once you get into the river, it's around -7. So we have about 8 feet of bedrock that's going to have to be removed from a portion of this channel. And again, all that rock that we removed will be incorporated as to the fill behind this. As well as from the interior of the fishway and in the interior of the fishway up on the other side of Main Street. So that's kind of like our goal. And of course, we'll also have a certain amount of fill or excavation for stone armor protection at the upstream exit, as well as that water intake adjacent to the Main Street Dam. So any excavation within the river, those sediments would be beneficially, reused and incorporated in the fill behind this wall. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yep. Okay. All right. All right. Any other questions? I mean, we have a lot of new ideas that have been shared with you since our July 17th walk and conversation. So want to be cognizant of the time for the agenda, but also want to invite any other questions, thoughts, ideas that we can carry forward into our work in the next few weeks and couple months. And if not, I'll just continue on into our next slide, which will kind of outline a little bit more of the conversation with the agencies relative to permitting and development of permit applications. Right. So as we noted, we met with the agencies back on September 28th. And again, we have a schedule to submit these applications by the end of this year. We again confirmed that CRMC will be the lead state agency for permitting. Of course, they'll coordinate their review with RIDEM, which will have jurisdiction over the upstream freshwater resource areas. But again, our team is essentially utilizing the content of the prior applications. We noted that two fishways constructed within the river occupying a significant volume and footprint of that aquatic resource were permitted in 2009. So really from a resource concern perspective, what we're proposing is a significant reduction and obviously a community benefit. So we're kind of going to emphasize that in our filings as well. Some of the design issues that we'll be addressing in the applications will be, again, the permanent structures placed in the river for the fishway entrance. And, I just outlined the footprint, if you will, and the volume of that. And again, the tree canopy that currently exists along the riverbank. And essentially, we're proposing to enhance that tree canopy up on the Slater Mill Park upstream of Main Street, in some of those open areas. So again, just trying to select the species that will provide that most, community benefit, if you will, in recognizing the values for the entire Blackstone. There is an Army Corps nationwide permit that is being issued in March of 26. So, there's a couple different, considerations as to filing before or after that nationwide permit. But our goal here is, recognizing that there are certain, benefits, if you will, from regulatory review and timelines, that being able to submit this package, if you will, to Army Corps before March. So that will be our goal. So again, there are some strategies in terms of how we develop those materials that we're incorporating into our work. And again, just addressing the water quality certification for the dredge of 401. There were sediment data that was taken downstream at Slater Mill. We took some additional sediment samples adjacent to the Fishway exit at Slater Mill as part of the Elizabeth Webbing investigation. We went that far downstream just to kind of get baseline for Elizabeth Webbing. And really the results that we saw were consistent with the results that were given to RIDEM in 2007. So again, if you look at the volume of material that was proposed to be removed for the two Daniel Fishways in 2009 and those permits, we're reducing that volume by certainly an order of magnitude. So again, we see this as being kind of a nominal project. But again, we'll maintain that in our conversation. The one part here being there was downstream, gate facility modifications that were permitted and designed and coordinated with Main Street Hydro on River Right downstream of Main Street. Those same downstream, improvements, if you will, are incorporated into our permitting. So that'll be a conversation that we'll want to have again with Main Street, just to kind of revisit those. And the plan for that is obviously the permit will entail activity on that property. We'll just need to have the sign off from that facility. And again, that's a conversation that we look to have in the coming weeks. So with that, I'll just kind of outline our next steps here. Again, we're kind of wrapping up our design. You've seen them graphically depicted. We have engineering drawings that represent more or less these renderings on our plans. And we're just, again, just developing the construction sequence, the traffic management, some of the structural details, if you will, for the Fishway, again, to a permitting level design. We plan to review these with RIDEM, and TNC in the city, and certainly any other stakeholders that would be interested in reviewing and commenting on these designs. So again, we can put together a package that is most reflective of the community's, desires and goals for the project. So again, in the next few months, next few weeks, we'll be very busy. Again, we'll get that feedback for review in mid-December, and then we'll, again, we did have a meeting with the PRA back in, I want to say August, and really good conversation with them. But really, the takeaway from that was to work with the executive director, Jason, which we have been doing and will continue to do with some of his staff as well, just to kind of make sure that the city is ready to sign these applications on the PRA's behalf when that time comes. So again, that'll be an important part of what we're doing here in the coming weeks. So with that is the last slide of the presentation. And again, happy to take any questions or comments or ideas that we can carry forward.
I have plenty of questions, but I don't want to steal everyone's time. Okay, I wanted to make one comment. I don't know if you'd seen on the other notes that we'd taken on a previous conversation, but I had an informal conversation with the National Park Service. They're technically not allowed to be working right now, but just had a friendly chat about these renderings, and their comments were basically, I know that you added in more impervious surface than you necessarily anticipate, but it's easier to permit it with more and take it away rather than the other way around. But they did make the comment that they agree there should be less impervious surface. They hoped that the retaining wall was part of this, of like rebuilding and completing repairs because it's in really bad shape in some areas along the river.
Mhm.
And they also mentioned that a lot of the trees that you're proposing in the northern parcel across from NPS probably have to go for two reasons. One is the access for NPS to be able to maintain that dam. They need to be able to basically bring in a crane, and that crane has to have enough room without tree cover to get down there. And the other is that Pawtucket has a view shed easement from their new street coming in that you have to be able to see Slater Mill. And a lot of those trees seem to be in the way. So just a revised planting plan for that. The last comment or question that they had was, how are the railings and promenade places compatible with the need for dam repair construction staging area where the plaza is shown? You kind of addressed that in your presentation here today, that the part that you have as a plaza was what they previously used as construction staging, but I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, all very good points. And again, our intent here is to put something on paper. It's not locked in. It's not what's going to be built. It's just what's going to be permitted. And again, we want to try to get what we're putting in front of the permitting agencies to be most reflective of those intents that you've outlined. So again, thank you for sharing those with us, and we'll keep those in mind certainly as we go forward.
Okay. Do you know if reconstruction or repairs on the retaining wall is part of this project?
Frankly, no. You only get this type of access once in a generation. So I agree. Dean and I and, our team have done work on other portions of the river wall in Pawtucket, so we know what that's entailed. If there are other sources of funding that we could incorporate, certainly, a permanent amendment would be something that could be incorporated into 26. And again, we don't want to slow down the works of having a permit issued, but if there are nominal adjustments to the scope or footprint or activities, certainly we want to maximize the benefit to the community and the city with the investment of resources to gain access for equipment to be in this proximate area, because you may not get another opportunity to get downstream of the Main Street Bridge in the way that you will now to repair those sections of the Fishway. And obviously, the work that we're going to be doing in rock removal, wall removal, there's going to be vibrations, and that kind of comes with the parcel with doing work around dams and bridges. There are obviously methodologies for monitoring vibrations during construction on historic and vulnerable resources. I'm working on another project for the Park Service now along the Colonial Parkway, in Virginia, where we have a very, very robust vibration monitoring and proactive intervention system to safeguard that infrastructure. So again, that's part of the final design. That's in the next phase. But again, that type of thinking is going on into our design in this permitting level phase right now. So
I think one of the worries, excuse me, of the Park Service, and I don't work for them anymore, so I can't say for sure. But that wall, it's hard to describe, but when you're going down the stairs to get to the river on that northern parcel, the wall to the right has been severely undercut. That it doesn't have enough structural support. It has cracks going up it that you can see daylight through. So creating any type, disturbing that soil in any way and putting in, because I'm sure when you're building it, you have to make sure it's safe for people to be in there. I can't see how it's even possible that this would happen without fixing that wall first, or else the wall will fall into the river.
Well, part of the work that Fuss Mill Deal did John, it was 2018, 19. We did a extensive subsurface investigation. We did borings, test pits along this entire length. The test pits expose the backside of this wall, so we know what the configuration and the depth of this wall is. We know where bedrock is. We know that this wall is set on bedrock. I and our team did a visual inspection of every square foot of this wall. We have continuous documentation. And again, that was 5 years ago. And certainly things can change of where those stones are, where those voids are, where those cracks are. So
that wall, I think, is pretty good. The part that juts out into the river.
This one right here. Yeah.
Yes, there. So the water's been constantly going river left and has undercut the structure.
we have, like, that was another area we put particular focus into. There's a little bit of a concrete slab around this area, probably put in to kind of mitigate those concerns. Obviously bedrock is down here and the walls, is constructed on bedrock. We know that. But again, take your concerns, very obviously, they're very legitimate, and that would be part of, the work that we would do to safeguard. And if we can, again, if there is funding that we can put into the project to have these co-benefits, certainly that would be something we would like to do. So if that's a conversation that we can have with the city as the owner of that wall, the sources of funding, certainly Dean has some ideas of where those funding sources may be. But again, in the federal environment now, those funding sources are very, they change, if you will. So.
Hey, Neil, one other thing to add too, like if it sincerely can't support what we're doing for, the service life of these proposed improvements, we're gonna address it in the design. We're not gonna build this house of cards.
Yeah, essentially, this access, even though it's, again, it's shaded just to kind of depict it and identify it, it's really reinforced. This is rated for construction equipment, heavy construction equipment. We're not talking about plastic grass paved stuff. We're talking about articulating concrete blocks filled in with topsoil, seating. Again, this area is not just, a little pedestrian plaza. This is constructed for heavy equipment. This portion of the fishway is not just something for people to walk on. This portion is for construction equipment to drive over. So again, the footprint of those activities for the Park Service to have access, wherever their porta dams would land, wherever they crane and get their equipment and people into, we're kind of designing that with all of that, in mind, so that we're not, again, precluding the Park Service from being able to do anything that it hasn't been able to do before.
I have a really maybe silly preliminary sort of question, but I realized it when we were going over this. So this, I know you said the size of the grate will depend on whether it's for construction access or just for pedestrian, but depending on how open it is, I feel like trash will be a problem. And how, is there a plan or is there an example of where someone else maintained this really well? And similarly, I know we have attracted flows and things to be able to get the fish in, and kind of once they're in, I feel like they probably don't have an option and they kind of have to go up. But will people walking over the grate and presenting like shadows be a deterrent for fish?
Yeah, that's you put your finger on exactly what I was trying to articulate before, is finding that balance between all those goals and design constraints. So in other words, to enhance the light and the visibility through this, maintain like the certain size grading that will provide ADA accessibility. So again, there are going to be certain portions of this that will have a very fine grading that will allow a person with a wheelchair or a cane or whatever to cross over. But we also want to be able to get as much light in and obviously prevent litter and debris from getting into the fifthway, but also down here to enable that grading to support heavy equipment that needs to get across. Again, the light is something that we're thinking about very obviously carefully down here in this tunnel portion. Our thought is that there's going to have to be dedicated LED lighting down there. And again, you can put sensors to kind of supplement lighting, to kind of provide either something that is, very bright for Rydam and its safety and its crew that gets down into that fishway. But also maybe dimmable or, work with the spectrum and the lighting intensity, if you will, and the frequency of those, the light, if you will, to naturalize something. So again, there may be things that we do to optimize the light environment if it's not conducive to fish passage. But again, all of that will be built in here. That electrical service that currently serves all of these light poles will also service the power. Again, this is a conversation with Rydam for the gates, these motorized gates. There will be sensors that monitor the river levels downstream, upstream of Main Street, as well as upstream. And the gate positions will be adjusted both seasonally to kind of incorporate the water, the seasonal water management strategies that we developed. I don't want to get into that too much, but there were certainly concerns that the Park Service had about the volumes of flow over both the spillway from an aesthetic standpoint, as well as for their demonstration water wheel. And we obviously know that Main Street also has interest in the volume of water that its facility has. But again, that'll be a separate conversation, but that'll all be incorporated into the strategy, if you will, submitted with the agencies.
What about the trash component? Is there a best practice there?
I think that you obviously don't want debris and trash from getting down through the grading. I think the typical grading open might be, inch in one dimension or smaller. So again, cigarette butts getting down there, but certainly put receptacles out here. I know that the city may have a policy on receptacles. So again, we want to try to find that balance to provide the most responsible way to manage it. Without creating, an environmental concern or maintenance concern from that standpoint. So
I do know that the city has receptacles just downstream at Festival Pier, which they never, ever, ever empty.
Yeah, so maybe that's a consideration here when you're writing an O&M requiring certain maintenance.
Mhm.
And similarly for stormwater, not that there's a ton of impervious right above, but just thinking about that plaza and stormwater running off of it and everything immediately going into that grate and getting it really clogged up. So is there a stormwater plan, or is that sort of like, that's what happens? It runs off the plaza, it goes in the grate.
yeah, Dean can speak to this more because he's done a lot of work, the PRA, Pine Street. Essentially, there's all those improvements along the city in Pine Street and those sidewalks and those water gardens. They're all permeable pavers. So essentially, there's no runoff component to
Okay.
deal with. Those pavers are permeable. So again, we're trying to utilize a design and aesthetic approach that the PRA has already blessed, if you will, to reflect the goals for the community development. But Dean, I don't know if you have anything else you would add.
Yeah, the goal is that for the vast majority of the storms, there will be no runoff. You might get some giant storm, and especially like some of these big, they get 2 inches, 3 inches an hour. Sure, there'll be some runoff, but 95% of the storms, water is going to infiltrate directly into the ground at that location, and no runoff.
And will it be graded in a way where in that sort of top right corner where you can see the truck, it would be sort of a break in elevation so that anything on the sidewalk would stay on the sidewalk more so it's not everything on the sidewalk coming down and then coming down?
Yeah, there are catch basins along that curb line. So again, we're not really doing anything to the drainage. We're just protecting the drainage and, again, trying to recognize the traffic alignment corridor, modifications that would be done there. And there may be drainage improvements that are being done as part of those, that pedestrian corridor improvements along Main Street, going down from the transit station to the soccer stadium. So again, we're, kind of aware of those improvements being done along Main Street through this entire corridor, and just trying to maintain the flexibility to adapt to whatever, stormwater and other utility improvements may be done.
Thanks. The last question I had was around portage, and I know that you had proposed a couple of different portages in the beginning and it got, eliminated because it was decided it was too close to the dam for safety. And I think that's still a question of like, what is the correct distance? Because every dam is different. I know FERC says 300 feet is the sort of gold standard, a rule of thumb, but depending on the pull of the water and the elevations and the sort of topography on the side of if there's like a safe spot to kind of pull in, you can definitely get closer. Some dams we go right up to and we feel totally safe with. But point being, I know it was taken out for now, but if we found a portage design that folks agreed on, or, before actual construction, is this sort of modifiable so that that could be potentially added in, or is it, we did this, it therefore precludes doing portage at these two specific locations?
Just, if I could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah.
Portage is extremely important. Public access is important too, but so is portage. And we have, looked at this as an opportunity that is presenting itself, for portage, and that would be all of the public access that goes down along Fish Ladder, from the exit all the way down to the entrance. And that could be a portage path. And then there's the concepts of other options for a portage path above, whether it's river right or river left by the dam. I don't know what the Park Service's position on that is. They may have something to say. They are a partner with us. But I think that for the purposes of the work of Fuss and O'Neill, they can speak to the concept of it. The problem that we run into, and this is a challenge, is the fact that there is no funding for them to get involved in design work with the current DEM funding that we have. That's BWRS, the Bay and Watershed Restoration. Public or recreation is not eligible as under that. So, but this is extremely important, and I think it warrants us to look for alternative sources of funding to maybe take portage survey work, portage design to a higher level. But for the purposes of the current contract that we have with Fuss and O'Neill, it's not a task. It's not a task in the grant that the Nature Conservancy has from DEM either.
So regardless of that part, snapped our fingers, we got a $20,000 million, right? Don't worry about the money part, just we made a portage design. Can we put it here, or is this like, we did this is important for how the fishway is designed, you can't just be adding in steps somewhere, you know what I mean?
I think you can draw some lines and say, oh, by the way, here's an opportunity to further refine and go into a design for portage.
Specifically on these parcels though, I really dislike the river right option because it's incredibly far. And I know that, again, like taking out right above the dam is really hard. I think in an ideal world, we work with PRA and we get an easement to go on the parcel that's just north or east, whatever, up.
300 feet up from the dam.
Right, I
Yeah.
think that's what
That's-
makes the most sense, and
that's
then
a-
you're staying on
That's a
river,
goal.
and you're staying on river left, so maybe we don't worry quite as much about the upper parcel, but in particular that lower parcel, I guess is my thought of like, we're rebuilding this, we're putting in this big retaining wall, we have all these design features. Can we still at some point put in a portage to get back into the river on the lower portion, or is it sort of like, no, because of how we've designed this fish passage, it sort of precludes any other opening?
And
What
then
you're saying
also-
is that, I'm sorry,
And then also, I just wanted to point out that if we wanted to get fish portage under one permit, we have to make sure the limit of disturbance is big enough and justify a bigger limit of disturbance. So we wouldn't have to apply for a brand new wetland application.
I don't know, what was brought up is that because of the wetland application perimeters, and Nils, you can correct me if I'm wrong, there is the ability for modifications to be made.
As long as the limit of disturbance doesn't change.
Yeah, so I can speak to this now because we actually have this area, and again, this is part of our conversation. Where this wall tie-ins right here, where my cursor is, this is where the wall transitions from a 20-foot high wall to about an 8-foot high wall. Okay, so if you're looking across a river, it becomes a very high wall to a relatively low wall. We have actually a staircase that we had shown that it goes down to this kind of forested area, but again, we have to draw the line somewhere. And again, we don't want to prevent or preclude access to this forested area. If somebody wants to carry a boat down here and come across the bridge and put it in, they're going to be able to get through the forest, but we don't want to make it dangerous. I think at this point, right now, we have our limit of disturbance drawn here because the water that they're going to be pumping out of this construction area is going to have to go into, I'll call it filter bags or other treatment devices that, allow that water to drain back into the river. And this is the footprint of the area that we were planning to do that. So again, part of our conversation with RIDEM and others in the coming weeks will be to say, where is that limit of disturbance drawn? And is that large enough to incorporate some of these contingencies that we're thinking about? And, we can justify that within the theater of operations and the construction of the fishway and these improvements.
Has an easement been granted by PRA yet?
We did send graphics to them. This is a graphic that we sent to the PRA. They indicated no kind of issue or, major impediment to gaining the permit, the access easements for these areas. We do know that the parking is used for the soccer stadium, and that's, probably frankly year round. So again, we're trying to minimize the footprint for our construction operations to only those that are necessary. And frankly, this little limb here, isn't quite necessary. But again, we just want to try to get as much access here. And again, you can kind of see that LOD is extended downstream of the footprint of where we had actually proposed to build the improvements for the public. So again, this is in the conversation with the city at this point.
So my worry is that during that presentation and during conversations with PRA, portage was discussed. And that was a benefit to the PRA, that you are creating river access, not just river viewing. We are now changing that.
Well, Dean, yeah, go ahead, Dean.
Presentation, the PRA, we made clear that we could not make portage work at this time here. And we didn't hear any objections whatsoever to that. In fact, all we heard was support. And hey, we got to continue working to develop this. They asked us, we followed up with them. They asked us for this graphic. One thing to add regarding these easements is that what they're doing is using this graphic to engage potential developers and what to expect in terms of land that needs to be set aside on the developable parcels for when they're preparing the redevelopment proposals. So I guess I don't see it. Was involved in this project very early and got re-engaged over the last several months. And so I haven't been privy to all the conversations with the city and PRA, but the more recent conversations, like I have not, and I've been talking with the city offline as well, have not heard that, portage has to be implemented as part of this phase of the project. I do think it's for us to show us a, potential, LOD to make sure that if possible can get developed at some point in the future. But I don't see the city, the city would love to have it, but it's not a deal killer. That's not there.
And this is later on the agenda, but just a note that the RFP was posted, so I put a link there. I'll have a link in the notes. And I had a conversation with a couple of the planners, and they mentioned that it didn't end up going in the RFP. They thought it would, but they decided to not include it within that document and to just have conversations with developers as they choose who would be working on it. I don't think that was an ideal decision because we really wanted this to be part of the very early stage of making sure that everyone came in, understood that these areas would be sort of off limits and have a different purpose. Without that being specifically called out in the RFP, it's possible that, folks would propose things. Hopefully it's an early enough stage design of what they're proposing that it could be modified to avoid these areas, but I guess that those conversations will happen later in the process. Are there other questions that folks have or comments?
Oh, one really small one, sorry. The entrance from Main Street, if there could be some type of removable bollard system to ensure that cars don't drive up on it. When I did work at Slater Mill, if we ever left the gate open to the park, that was obviously not to be driven down. People still drove down it. So removable, obviously, so people can assess it. But
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I mean, that's actually a very good point. This, I can imagine somebody trying to drive for whatever, people do stupid things. And then again, I think your point was also taken on this location here. Again, this would not be visually apparent. It would be, just kind of below the grass, if you will. But yeah, good point. Thank you.
Yeah, the view shed easement is from School Street, so the street that you can still see in this picture that goes to the top of the screen.
I
It's
see, it's
that-
looking towards Slater Mill.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, that's a Slater Mill, so yeah, any trees there could disturb the view shed easement that old Slater Mill Association created with the PRA.
I see.
We'll make some adjustments for that. Thank you.
And you could do, like hydrangeas or like, low level
I was
shrubbery
just gonna
that's
say,
not
can we do
gonna.
native like shrubs there instead
Yeah.
of trees?
Yeah.
Okay.
And or does it seem like that number of trees could be relocated on the site so you don't lose the overall number? Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Awesome.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that.
Great, well, thank you so much for this, and if folks have other things that you think of, if you guys can share those slides with me and I will link them in the notes, and people can always reach out later and say, wait, I forgot, or I just noticed this, just shoot Austin O'Neill an email, me an email, Matt, whomever, and we'll make sure that those get to the right folks.
Great. All right, great.
You know, it's Florida,
Yeah, say Dean?
you'll forward that.
Yeah, I'm gonna make a PDF right now. And Dean and I will stay on for the next agenda items, just to listen, or, again, if we have questions. But Ian and Allison, thank you for your time. Yeah.
Thanks.
Take care,
Thank you.
everyone. Have a great rest of your
Bye.
day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
So the other things on our agenda, we talked about the PRA and redevelopment. And RIDEM had presented with Austin O'Neill to PRA on August 26th. Pawtucket had requested that easement map, Austin O'Neill provided that, we have it now. Again, they're not within the RFP, but will be included in later conversations. Any easement or RFP questions?
The only thing I'll add is I ran into one of the PRA board members at the Health Equity Zone tabling event.
Mhm.
And she really loved the grading idea, especially the idea of people being able to go and see what's going on, so.
Yeah.
Just kudos on that idea and following through.
Great, thanks. We also wanted to just provide any updates to Elizabeth Webbing, if there are any, or if anyone knows anything about what's going on with One Drop Hydro or Manville Hydro applications that I know are both pending. John Marsland, do you have any update on that?
No, I don't have any updates.
Okay, thanks. I know I linked in the notes that the Narragansett Bay Commission had filed a notice of intervention to FERC against the One Drop Hydro due to a technical thing about misnotification, and also the bigger problem of the potential impacts to this multi-billion-dollar combined sewer overflow infrastructure project that they're required to do by EPA to address water quality improvements. So they basically said, you can't have this tiny project affect this huge investment that we have. It's totally unacceptable. So it was a pretty compelling letter. I don't know if One Drop has had to respond to that or if there's been any kind of follow-up. I don't think so, but I have it linked there. I would check out the letter. For funding, I don't think we've heard anything from NOAA yet. Yeah, I chatted with Danielle informally from NOAA, and she said that they are pre-government shutdown. They were actively reviewing all of the proposals, so without any other indication to not, they are going forward and hopefully getting that funding out the door. Last year, I think we heard around October. So again, we're not totally out of bounds of not hearing anything yet, and of course the shutdown will push everything back, but
Yeah, I can add, it's not really any news, but Nibner has received 2 other NOAA grants for completely unrelated things, different grant competitions, but their timelines have been pushed back from what they anticipated to start with.
Yeah.
Just because of new restrictions from the Department of Commerce. So, it's just a moving target,
Yeah.
it keeps changing.
If some NOAA folks are still working, Rachel, or totally?
I know that NOAA affiliate, basically
Mhm.
contractors,
Yeah.
are functioning,
Uh-huh.
but not the actual federal employees.
Okay, got it. Yeah, EPA, there are still folks working, so it seems to be super spotty across agencies.
Yeah.
Okay. good to know.
Also note that TNC and the Collab and others had some conversations with Army Corps of Engineers about potential WRDA funding, so.
Well, yeah, actually, I did not go, but my, the state director and, Angela, who's our government relations specialist, went to Washington to meet with the congressional delegation. I gave them a couple of large footprints of this, and they sat down with Senator Whitehouse, and he's really, really keen on this. It's interesting to note that Stephanie and I met with Army Corps. We met with the district, New England District, Wendy Gendron, and a young lady by the name of Maylee Boyce, who's with Senator Whitehouse in Washington. Maylee spent 16 years working for Army. She's an attorney. She knows this stuff inside out. So what we've pitched to them is this. It's possible for potential for a WRDA authorization under 15 million, small project under their aquatic restoration program, 206 program. But we've done everything in the beginning. We've done the feasibility, we've got the designs, we're gonna have the permits. Can they then come in with WRDA funding and be a partner with us on this? So that's currently on the table, and I've been back and forth with Maylee about certain aspects of proceeding with the future. For them to see what we just saw here today would really open up their desire, Army Corps, their desire to really get involved in this. And from what I heard from the meetings in Washington with the senator, he's really excited about this and will do everything he possibly can to see to it that it's authorized and funded. That's the other thing. You can get authorization, but you need the fight for the funding. So it's an option. I mean, we have to be creative. We have to look at everything that's out there. Even if we get a lot of the NOAA funding, we're going to need more.
Thank you. And then for the last agenda item, I just had, events, outreach, other updates. I left it on there from last time, but if anyone has any other feedback on the Blackstones, on the Collaboratives Fish Passage webpage, we're happy to take that. And I was wondering if the renderings are something that we could put up there and, label as a draft, but just to share more publicly of what might this look like for the average person who's not going to read the fancy site plan that we have on there right now.
I think it's a great idea.
I'm seeing nods, so great. Okay. So we'll update that to include the renderings. And if there's anything specific that you want us to really know as sort of a caveat with those renderings, just shoot me an email with when you send the PDF, and I will make sure we include that in our language. Great, so we ran through everything else. Does anyone else have any other questions, thoughts, updates, topics that you want to consider?
I'll mention a couple of things from NBEP. I think most of you around the table are familiar with these, but just in case, we have an event upcoming on the 28th at the Cumberland Public Library that is focused on aquatic connectivity in the region. So we're trying to have some conversations among practitioners, managers, scientists about how we can advance this work region-wide. And it's free, it's a full day, registration is still open, so please join us if you can. And then the second thing I'll note is that we have an open RFP, again, for aquatic connectivity projects. And it's a pretty broad range. At this point, it's anything except construction. So it's our traditional design, planning, permitting, engineering, but also we've introduced an additional track for groups that are interested in doing some sort of pre-planning work. So for example, looking at prioritizing barrier removals or fish passage projects in a particular subwatershed. Basically doing some capacity building support for organizations that are kind of just getting started. And so we're excited to see what comes in on that RFP, and please get in touch with us if you want to chat. We're happy to speak, talk to you about how to put a proposal together or, frame a project and things like that.
What's the deadline for that last one?
That's December 1st. Yeah.
And what was the date on that, water connectivity?
It is Monday, the 28th,
And I.
or the 27th.
27.
Oh, yes. I had 20th in my brain too. I totally was like, yeah, 27th.
Does anybody from DEM Freshwater Wetlands sign up?
Yes.
Great.
And just to note, that same day is also the RFP walkthrough for Pawtucket Redevelopment Agency. I know that there were a couple spies at the last one, so those are always, yeah, just be, oh no, I'm just here to listen, and then noting down what's being mentioned. So if anyone's around for that, it is open to the public. Everyone can go.
Yes.
Listen.
And that information is in the RFP for the redevelopment if you're interested. Great, anything else?
Welcome, Jessica.
I know, I was like, I feel like you should, I
Yeah,
don't know if you have any thoughts or questions or,
Getting my head around everything. I was just thinking I gotta make sure I get out there before it gets too cold and see everything. And then I think it will wrap around my head really more, but it looks really cool and exciting. So this is awesome to hear about, and I'm excited to hear more as it keeps moving along.
Thank you. Okay, well, also Pawtucket was really sorry they couldn't be here today. There was an overlapping event that they had this morning. But our next meeting will be our typical Thursday, November 20th. DEM and Zoom. I think that one, yeah, I don't have any overlaps. One of them coming up is NBEP steering committee meeting, which is always a challenge, but yeah, so we'll see you again on November 20th.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.